I'm gonna warn you up front, man. This isn't one of those fun campfire stories you laugh off on the drive home. I've been a survival instructor for a little over a decade. I've been through blizzards, whiteouts, busted gear, broken bones, stupid decisions from clients who thought REI receipts equal experience. The works. I've had nights where I genuinely thought I was going to die out there. But what happened on that trip, that was different. That's the one my wife Claire doesn't let me talk about when the kids are awake. That's the one that got me out of deep winter guiding for good. You asked me the other night why I flinch when the wind hit the windows just right. Why I can't stand the smell of freezer burned meat. Yeah, this is why. So, I am from Chicago. Grew up on the south side, concrete and traffic and sirens. The outdoors was Lake Michigan on a cold morning, and that was about it. I didn't really discover the woods until after high school, when somebody dragged me on a weekend camping trip in Wisconsin. Long story short, I froze my ass off, burned the food, got lost for 3 hours, and loved every second of it. Fast forward a decade, I'm certified, insured, and paying the bills working as a survival instructor. Weekends in Wisconsin, longer courses up in Minnesota and Michigan, corporate, team building, misery sprinkled in between. Claire calls it adult babysitting with knives. My hobby kind of bled into the job, cooking. I like proving you can eat more than just sad freeze-dried mush out there. Good food keeps morale up, and when you're teaching people how not to die in the woods, morale matters. Now, about a year and a half ago, I got this idea. There is this stretch of wilderness up in northern Minnesota, close to the Canadian border. Thick boreal forest, lakes like shards of glass in winter, silence that feels like a weight on your shoulders. I'd done guiding up there before, but always in late winter or early spring, when the worst of the cold had started loosening its grip. This time, I pitched it as a hardcore winter immersion. 5 days of snowshoes, pulling sleds, sleeping in hot tents, building proper winter shelters. The real deal, none of that I brought my electric heated vest nonsense. My friends jumped on it. It was supposed to be a private trip, just me and 3 guys I've known since forever. Mark, loud, built like a linebacker, always the one making jokes when things get tense, works construction. Louis, quiet, photographer, the guy who sees shapes in shadows and calls them composition opportunities. Jake, software engineer, wiry, smarter than the rest of us combined, but zero common sense in the woods. You've met them all at one point or another. They'd been nagging me for years to take them on a real trip, no tourists, no corporate groups. So I said yes. I booked the time off, cleared it with Claire, promised I'd be smart and careful, and come home in one piece. My kids made me swear to bring them pine cones. We planned it for late January, deep winter, exactly the kind of cold that bites through 3 layers and still finds your bones. Let me get one thing out of the way. You know how some guys unwind by watching trash TV or sports clips? I read folklore. It started as professional interest. Know your environment, right? Bears, wolves, weather patterns, all that. But then I stumbled on the old stories. Ojibwe, Cree, Algonquin tales, about the spirit of winter, of starvation and madness, the thing that waits in the tree line when the snow is too deep and the meats run out. The Wendigo. Depending on which story you read, it's a spirit, a monster, or some kind of cursed person, always tied to winter, always tied to hunger and cannibalism. Sometimes it's a gaunt, frostbitten human thing, sometimes it's a huge and stretched out, with bones showing under the skin like it's wearing someone else's body, like a hand-me-down jacket. When I first read that stuff, I did what everyone does. I rolled my eyes, mentally filed it under cool campfire material, and moved on. But the story stuck, especially the parts about how a Wendigo is never full, how eating only makes it hungrier, how the cold it brings isn't just the air. It's this feeling that gets into you, like something inside is starving, even as you're sitting there with a full stomach. So yeah, when I picked the route for that trip, I knew the stories. I even joked about it in the group chat. Boundary Waters, late January. Wendigo country boys. No one go crazy and eat each other, okay? They sent laughing emojis. I sent a little skull one. We thought it was funny. We drove up from Chicago in my beat-up SUV, packed to the ceiling with gear, snowshoes, bulks, hot tent, stove, axes, rope, first aid kits, the works. I'd done the risk assessment a dozen times. Winter is unforgiving, but it's predictable if you respect it. The last real town we passed through before heading into the wilderness was one of those northern Minnesota places where everyone looks like they were born in flannel. We grabbed gas and had one last hot meal at this tiny diner with condensation frozen on the inside of the windows. The waitress, a woman in her 50s with hands like she'd been working since she was 10, asked where we were headed. I laid out the rough area, the route, not giving the exact lakes but enough to be polite. She went quiet. "You're going to be careful out there," she said, and it wasn't a question. "Always," I said. "I do this for a living." That didn't seem to relax her much. She refilled my coffee, then leaned a little closer. "My granddad used to talk about something in those woods," she said. "Something that comes when the winter's bad and people get desperate. Takes the ones who get turned around or do bad things to stay alive." Mark grinned. "You mean like Wendigo stuff?" He made claws with his hands. She looked at him. No smile. "Call it what you want," she said. "Just don't joke about hunger out there, and don't follow voices." I remember that line. Don't follow voices. It sounded dramatic at the time, like weird small town superstition. Right now, I'd cross half the country to tell her she was right. We left the diner, drove until the roads ran out, then parked at the trailhead. It was late afternoon and the world looked like the inside of a snow globe. Gray sky, thick forest, snow mounded on everything. The forecast said it'd stay cold and mostly clear, with clouds rolling in but no big storms. For winter guiding, that's about as good as it gets. Cloudy is fine. Cloudy means you don't freeze quite as fast when the sun goes down. We strapped on our snowshoes, clipped into the sled harnesses, and headed in. The woods swallowed the road noise in under a minute. That's something I always try to warn people about, the silence. City folks think quiet means they can't hear traffic. Real quiet is when you can hear your own pulse and the snow shifting under your boots. It messes with your head if you are not ready for it. Louis loved it. He kept stopping to take pictures of trees and frozen reeds, and our breath hanging in the air like ghosts. Mark complained about how his toes were already freezing. Jake asked every 20 minutes if we were on the right path, even though the route was marked on his GPS and mine. I took point, breaking trail, listening to the soft hiss of snow and the faint creak of branches in the cold. Everything felt normal for a while. We made camp on the shore of a frozen lake that first night, maybe 6-7 miles in. I told them how to cut blocks of compacted snow to make a wind wall. We set up the hot tent, a big canvas thing with a small collapsible wood stove, and got a fire going inside. For dinner, I made a stew. Real food, bacon, onions, potatoes, lentils, some dried sausage, a handful of spices. The smell filled the tent, cut through the scent of cold metal and damp wool. "You sure this is camping?" Mark said, shoveling a spoonful into his mouth. "Feels like cheating." "That's the point," I said. "If you can make it comfortable, you're more likely to make good decisions. Miserable people make desperate choices." We ate, we talked trash, we laughed. I showed them how to check their boots for frostbite, how to hang their damp clothes so they're dry and not freeze stiff as boards. We cycled through watch shifts that first night out of habit more than necessity. Black bears would be sleeping, wolves usually keep their distance, and the nearest human was probably 20-30 miles away. My watch was last. Sometime between 3 and 4 in the morning, I stepped outside the tent. The sky was a dark navy, bruised with clouds. The moon was a hazy smear behind them. The cold went straight up my nostrils and burned. The stovepipe ticked behind me as the fire settled. The tree stood there, spruce, pine, bare birch, walled around a frozen lake, like they were all leaning in to listen. I did a slow circle, listening. Silence. No wind. No animal sounds. Just that weird pressure of a cold air and stillness. I walked the perimeter of camp, my headlamp throwing a pale beam across the snow. Our sleds were where we'd left them. The latrine hole was still covered. The snow around camp was packed with our prints. Everything was normal. I took a deep breath, about to head back in, when I smelled it. Rot. Not strong, not the overwhelming stench of a fresh carcass, more like the inside of a freezer that lost power for a week and then got turned back on. Old meat and cold air. It came in a thin, sour thread, carried on air that hadn't been moving a second before. I swung my headlamp toward the tree line, my breath fogging in front of me. The beam showed trunks and shadows, and that thick, endless dark between the trees. "Hello?" I called out, hating how cliché it sounded, but also not wanting to be the guy who didn't check. No answer, obviously. I listened to branches crunching under weight, for the kind of soft padding steps you get from wolves. Nothing. Just the smell. There, then gone. Like it had slid past, checked us out, and kept going. I told myself it was probably a buried kill, something a wolf pack had stashed earlier in the season, and I'd just gotten a whiff because of some tiny air current. I went back inside eventually. I didn't mention it, didn't seem worth spooking the guys over a smell. That was my first mistake. We broke camp the next morning and headed deeper in. The sky stayed heavy and grey, the kind of way that makes midday look like late afternoon. Around noon, we left the frozen lake and started moving through thicker forest. The snow was untouched, no snowmobile tracks, no human prints, nothing but the tiny trails of rabbits and the occasional mark of a fox. I was in front, but Louis was just behind me, camera out. "Hold up," he said suddenly. I stopped. "What?" "Tracks," he said. "Big ones." He wasn't wrong. Off to the right of our trail, maybe 20-30 feet away, the snow dipped in a strange pattern, not a straight line like wolves or coyotes move in, more staggering, almost like a drunk man. But each depression was big, bigger than my boot by a good margin, and deeper, like something heavy had been walking there, even though there was a hard crust. I walked over carefully, testing each step. The air felt colder on that side of the trail, if that makes any sense, like my face stung more. "Bear?" Jake asked behind me. "Bears are sleeping," I said automatically, "and when they do walk, it doesn't look like this." The tracks were wrong. Too long, too narrow. Not the round, fat pads of a bear or the neat ovals of a wolf. Each depression had a deeper, elongated section at one end, like a heel. I could see the faint claw marks, but they were misaligned somehow, like they weren't all facing the same way. And the stride. I measure stuff as a habit. You do this long enough, it becomes second nature. This thing's stride was maybe 1.5 meters, no dragging between steps, like you get when someone's slogging in snowshoes. Just clean, deep impressions every few feet. "Moose?" Mark tried. "No," I said. "Moose hooves are split. You'd see it." I wasn't afraid yet, not really, just fascinated. I'd been in those woods a lot and never seen anything like it. The tracks crossed our path and disappeared into thicker forest. The snow on a couple of nearby saplings was brushed off, like something big had brushed past and shaken it loose. "Whatever it is, it's heavy," I said. "And it's alone, no smaller prints nearby." "Like a lone predator," Jake said, half teasing. I showed him a look, like a single animal in its territory. Could be some weird deformity on a wolf or, I don't know. We are not here to go chasing mystery tracks. Stay close, keep moving, we stick to the plan. I said the right words, but internally, something tugged at me. Heavy, alone, wrong. I told myself it was just a big wolf with messed up paws, or a moose that stepped weird, or whatever other rational explanation I could come up with. But as we moved on, I kept finding my eyes drifting to the tree line, just in case something was watching. We camped deeper in that second night. No lake this time, just a small clearing tucked between thick stands of spruce, branches forming a kind of natural roof. The guys were tired. Pulling sleds through even a few inches of snow is work if you're not used to it. They were quieter at dinner. We ate in the tent, steam from the stew fogging the ceiling, our gloves and socks hanging near the stove to dry. "Hey," Jake said mid-bite. "So you ever do the whole urban legend talk on these trips? Or is that just for paying clients?" Mark grinned. Yeah, tell us about the haunted woods, instructor. Scare us so we freeze to death faster. Louis rolled his eyes, but he had that interested look he gets when there's a story brewing. I hesitated. I usually don't go into the really dark stuff with clients, I said. People panic easily when they're already out of their comfort zone. But you asked, so I told them in broad strokes about the Wendigo lore, how it's tied to winter and hunger, how in some stories it used to be human, someone who'd eaten people to survive and gotten cursed for it, how in others it's this old thing, older than any of us, that just wears human shapes like clothes. Mark loved it. So, like skinny Bigfoot with worse manners? He said. Louis frowned. You're talking like it's real. I shrugged. I'm talking like it's real to the people who told those stories. They weren't stupid. Folklore usually grows around real dangers. Starvation, getting lost in storms, cabin fever, that kind of thing. And the voice stuff? Jake asked. You said something about that once, right? Like it calls you. Sometimes I forget what I've said when I'm half asleep on the couch with a book. In some stories, yeah, I said slowly. You hear someone you love calling for help. You follow the voice and that's it. That's how it gets you alone, away from the group. Mark snorted. Cool, so rule 1, don't follow the disembodied voices. Got it. We laughed. The tension broke. But there was this moment when the laughter died down and the wind shifted outside, where the tent went quiet and the stove crackled, and I could smell that faint sour rot again. I didn't say anything. I should have. Sometime that night, I woke up without knowing why. The stove was low but still burning. The tent was warm by winter standards. My face was cold, but my body was okay. The guys were asleep around me, bundled in their bags, breath making small clouds in the dimness. I listened, eyes closed, trying to figure out what had tugged me out of sleep. At first, nothing. Then I realized what was wrong. It was too quiet. When you are that deep in the woods, you get used to little noises. The stove ticking, someone rolling over in their bag, the faint whisper of wind, branches cracking in the distance as snow shifts. Right then, there was nothing. Like the world was holding its breath. I eased out of my sleeping bag, slid my boots on, shrugged into my coat, and pushed open the tent flap. The cold outside hit me like a wall. I stepped out, flipped my headlamp on, and did a slow sweep around camp. Our sleds, the stacked firewood, the latrine spot, the path we'd walked making dinner, all dusted with a fresh thin layer of snow. And around all of it, just at the edge of the clearing where the trees started, there were tracks, lots of them. Big, deep impressions, like the ones we'd seen earlier, close together now, circling camp, some overlapping like whatever had made them had paced, gone back to its own path, changed direction. I walked closer to the tree line, heart thumping against my ribs. The smell hit me right before the edge of my headlamp beam reached the trees. Rotten cold and something else I can't describe properly, like air from a freezer that hasn't been opened in years. I lifted the beam, and for a second, just one single second, I saw it. Tall, Wrong. It stood half concealed behind a pair of spruce trunks, so at first my brain tried to file it as just parts of the tree. Then the head moved, jerking slightly, and I realized it was looking back at me. Its body was stretched, gaunt, ribs showing through skin that looked too tight, like parchment over knuckles. The bones were all in the right places but extended, like someone had taken a human and dragged them out vertically until the proportions stopped making sense. I couldn't see all of its face, just the outline. Parts of it looked human or had been at one point. A mouth too wide, lips split and cracked, skin frostbitten and peeled in places. The eyes, God. You know when you stare into an open freezer and the cold burns your eyeballs? Imagine that, but coming from someone else's eyes. They glowed faintly, not like movie monster glowing, but like embers buried in ash, starving. Above its head, tangled in what might have been hair or just frozen, mad at something, were shapes like broken antlers. Not clean deer antlers, jagged, asymmetrical, like bone had just kept growing and never stopped. It didn't move right. It was too still. The only thing shifting was the faint rise and fall of its chest, this subtle twitch of tendons under the skin, like it was struggling to hold itself back. For a second, I forgot to breathe. The cold didn't matter. The fact I was unarmed didn't matter. My whole body just screamed one thing: pray. Then my training finally kicked back in and my hand went for the flare at my belt. The second my fingers brushed it, the thing stepped back. Not like an animal, not a startle, just a single long step, smooth and deliberate, folding into the darkness between the trees. The smell hit me harder as it moved, like dust blowing off ruins. Then it was gone. The tree trunks, the shadows, the snow, nothing else. But the tracks were there, deep, fresh, leading away into the forest. I backed toward the tent slowly, keeping my headlamp on the tree line until I was at the flap. When I ducked inside, my hands were shaking. I didn't wake the others. I know how that sounds, but listen. Waking three tired, unexperienced winter campers in the middle of the night, telling them there's something out there, something you can't categorize, best case scenario. They panic and do something stupid. Worst case, they decide you're messing with them and stop trusting you when it actually matters. So I sat there by the stove, feeding it small pieces of wood, listening like my life depended on it. At some point, dawn began to smear gray through the tent walls. I'd been awake all night. When they finally stirred, I said, something walked around camp. Big. I saw it at the edge of the trees. We are changing the plan. We cut the route short and head back toward the lakes. Stick to open ground where we can see everything. Jay blinked blearily. Like a moose or something? No, I said. Not a moose. Bear? No. What was it then? Mark asked. I met his eyes. You don't want me to answer that. The thing about being a leader, especially in the woods, is that you don't have the luxury of sounding crazy. So I kept it practical. There is a large predator in the area, I said. Tracks are big. Behavior is odd. It approached camp last night. That's enough for me to adjust the trip. We are not going deeper in. We shortened the route and moved toward more traveled areas. They grumbled a little, but no one really argued. Even Mark, who usually has something to say, just ate his breakfast in silence. We stepped outside and they saw the trucks circling camp. No one joked then. Jesus, Louis whispered, squatting down to snap a picture. Henry, man, what is that? I don't know, I said, which was technically true, but I don't like how close it got without making noise. We packed up faster than usual, sleds loaded, harnesses tightened, snowshoes strapped on. As we moved, I kept my rifle slung across my chest instead of on my back. The safety was on, but my hand rested on the stock. The sky had gotten darker somehow. The clouds felt heavier. Snow started drifting down, fine and dry, flakes like dust. We moved along an old, faint portage trail. Visibility wasn't bad yet, but everything looked like flat and gray, depth sucked out of the world. Around mid-morning, we hit another set of tracks, cutting across our path. Not the weird ones this time. These were human, or had been. A single line of boot prints, half filled with new snow. The second had been walking unsteadily. The stride length changed a lot. Short, long, as if they'd been stumbling, losing and regaining balance. Someone else is out here, Jake said, sounding almost relieved. Maybe they saw whatever it was and took off. Maybe, I said, but my stomach twisted. The prints were old, a few days at least, judging by the snow, and they went off at an angle that made no sense, not following lakes or ridges or any kind of rational landmark, just wandering. I almost said something about it, but I caught myself. We needed to keep moving forward, not start spinning theories in place. We followed the main trail. The woods started to close in tighter around us, branches heavy with snow, leaning over the path like they were trying to push us back. The wind picked up a little, carrying that faint, familiar smell now and then. The guys were sweating inside their layers, tired, quiet. I was starting to think maybe we'd get out of there with nothing more than a terrifying story and a few weird photos. Then we hit the clearing. It was small, ringed with trees, much like the place we'd slept the night before. But instead of untouched snow, the ground was a mess of churned up footprints and other marks. There had been a camp here not long ago, maybe early winter, maybe longer. The remains of a fire ring sat in the middle, black rocks half buried in snow. A torn scrap of nylon tent fabric fluttered from a branch where it had been snagged. A cooking pot lay on its side, half filled with frozen, indistinguishable slop. Someone got sloppy, I said, more to myself than anyone else, leaving this much trash behind. Louis crouched near a tree. Guys, he said softly, come look at this. I walked over. At about chest height, on the trunk of a spruce, there were deep gouges, 4 of them, raking downward. The wood was torn out in long, ragged strips that had frozen and darkened. Higher up, there were more, out of reach for any of us unless we climbed. Bear? Mark said, but his voice was thinner than usual. Too high, I said. And the pattern's wrong. Bears don't. I trailed off. At the base of the tree, half buried in snow, was something that made every hair on my body stand up. A boot. Just one. The leather was stiff with cold. The laces were still done up tight. And near the top, the rim was torn in a way that looked bitten. The edges were ragged, like teeth had ripped through. I didn't pull it out of the snow. I didn't want to see what might or might not be inside. Jake swallowed hard. We should leave, he said finally. No sarcasm. No, this is a joke, right? Just flat fear. For once, I agree with the nerd, Mark muttered. I nodded. Yeah, we keep going. No more stops unless absolutely necessary. We started to move, but before we left the clearing, something caught my eye. Hanging from a low branch on the opposite side, almost blending in with the snow, were shapes. Bones. Small ones. Probably from rabbits, squirrels, something like that. They'd been tied together with strips of leather or some kind of sinew, hanging down like a grotesque mobile. A few were splashed with something dark, frozen and crusted. Blood probably, but it was too old to tell. They clicked softly as the faint wind moved them. This is some Blair Witch bullshit, Mark whispered. No, I said automatically. This is something else. Because Blair Witch was a movie, this was real. Henry, Louis said quietly, those tracks, the ones we've been following, are they, Wendigo stuff? I almost told him to shut up. Instead, I surprised myself by answering honestly. I don't know, I said, but I know I don't want to find out by staying here. By late afternoon, the snow had picked up. Not a full whiteout, but enough that visibility dropped. The world narrowed to a tunnel of grey and black. The path ahead, the silhouettes of trees, the shapes of my friends behind me. We were getting close to a chain of lakes that got more use even in winter. If we could reach them, odds were better off running into snowmobilers or other trekkers. Civilization, basically. The wind shifted and I smelled it again. Rot, old meat, freezer burn and something sweeter underneath, like decay. I didn't say anything. Then I heard my name. Henry. It came from off to the right, somewhere in the trees. I stopped dead. The guys nearly crashed into me. You okay? Jake asked. I held up a hand. Did you hear that? I said. Hear what? Mark asked. Henry, over here, man. Same voice, same direction. It sounded like Louis. Except Louis was standing right behind me, breathing hard. I turned my head slowly. Louis, I said. Say something. He blinked. What do you want me to say? His voice sounded normal, breathless, human, scared. The voice from the trees came again. Henry, come here. I found something. You gotta see this. Same tone as Louis when he finds a good shot. Same cadence, but off. Like someone had played a recording through a busted speaker. The rhythm was flattened, the edges wrong. The words were all there, but the feeling behind them was empty. My skin crawled. Don't move, I whispered. Jake shifted nervously. Is someone messing with us? I ignored him. Louis, I said, still staring at the trees. Did you ever tell me not to follow voices out here? We frowned. No, why would I? My brain clicked. The waitress. Don't follow voices. Every instinct I had screamed to bolt, to run toward that voice. Because what if someone really was out there? What if someone from that old camp was injured, half frozen, calling for help? That's how it works, right? You think you're being a decent human. I clenched my fists around my trekking poles until my fingers hurt. The voice called again, closer. Henry, I'm cold. Help me, man. The others looked at me, waiting for a call. I made it. We keep moving, I said, my own voice coming out low and strange in my ears. Stay on the trail. No one goes toward that, no matter what it sounds like. That's not a person. Do you understand me? What if it is? Jake asked, eyes wide behind his fogged glasses. Then they're already dead, I said, harsher than I meant to. And we'll join them if we try to play hero. He stared at me like he'd never seen me before. But he didn't argue. We started walking again, faster now. The wind picked up, snow stinging our faces. The voice followed us for a while, always just off to the right, always just far enough that we couldn't see anything between the trunks. Sometimes it sounded like Louis. Sometimes, I swear to you, it sounded like Claire. Henry, it called softer. Baby, please. I'm cold. Please don't leave me out here. My heart did something I can't describe. A painful twist, like it was trying to claw its way out of my ribs to get to her. I kept walking. I kept walking because the logical part of my brain was standing there in the middle of a burning building, yelling, "She's not here, she's at home, this is a trick." The rest of me felt like it was being peeled apart. It got louder, closer. The words slurred a little at the edges, like it hadn't quite figured out how to shape the sounds right. Eventually, after what felt like an hour but was probably 10 minutes, it stopped. Just cut off. No fading away, no last plea. Silence again, heavy and total. We didn't talk. There was nothing to say. By the time we reached the first of the more frequented lakes, it was getting dark. The snow had eased up, but the clouds made it feel later than it was. The temperature was dropping fast. We made camp on the lake itself, which is something I usually avoid if I can help it, but the tree line felt wrong, like standing too close to a mouth. Out on the ice, I could see in every direction. We drilled a couple of test holes to make sure the ice was thick enough, then set up the tent and stove. No one joked about the Wendigo anymore. No one wanted to talk at all. I made food on autopilot, hands moving through familiar motions while my brain replayed that glimpse in the trees, those eyes. The guys ate without complaint. Then we did something I almost never do with non-clients. We loaded weapons. I had my rifle, a 30-06, reliable and powerful. Mark had brought a shotgun for fun, planning to maybe do some small game hunting later in the trip. Jake had a revolver he barely knew how to use. Louis had a big, ugly camp knife. I'm not one of those people who thinks a bullet solves everything in the wild. Against weather and terrain, a gun is mostly for morale. You can't shoot hypothermia. But that night, I wanted every ounce of firepower we had. We set watches again. This time, I didn't pretend everything was fine. I laid it out. If something comes close, I said, wake everyone. Don't go outside alone. Don't leave the tent unless we're moving as a group. If something tries to lure you, ignore it. If something tries to get inside, we fight. What if it's, that thing, Jake said, voice tight. Then we make it regret picking our camp, I said. Fire and lead, that's all we've got. Does that work on spirit? Louis asked. I thought about the stories I'd read. Fire shows up in a lot of them, burning the body, burning the remains, the idea that heat can break the curse of endless hunger. It's better than nothing, I said. Mark nodded grimly. Then, let's give it nothing but hell. I took first watch this time. The sky had cleared somewhat, letting a thin smear of moonlight through, glowing faintly on the snow. The tent behind me was a dim, warm shape. Our breath had frozen on the inside of the outer fabric, tiny crystals that sparkled when the stove light shifted. I walked slow circles next to the tent, rifle in my hands, listening. For an hour, maybe two, nothing happened. Just the creak of ice shifting somewhere deep below, the faint whisper of wind across the lake. Then the smell hit hard. No warning this time. 1 second it was just cold air, the next it was like I'd stuck my head into a sealed freezer full of rancid meat. I gagged, eyes watering. The wind died. I heard it before I saw it, a crunch of snow, slow, deliberate. I swung the rifle toward the tree line at the far edge of the lake. At first, I thought the trees were moving. Then my brain caught up and realized it was between them. It stepped out onto the ice, maybe 50 yards away. In the open, with nothing to break up its silhouette, it was worse. It towered over us, 10 feet, maybe more. The limbs too long, joints bending, correctly but exaggerated. The bones in his arms and legs looked like they were straining under their own length. Skin pulled tight over them, grayish and stained with old something. Its torso was emaciated. The ribs jutted out so sharply I thought they might rip through. The stomach looked sunken beyond anything a living thing should have. I could see the outline of its spine through the back. The head? I don't have great words for that. Imagine a human skull stretched vertically, the jaw pulled down too far, showing too many teeth. Some were broken, some too long, all of them stained dark. The lips were tattered ruins, frozen cracks climbing up its cheeks. The eyes were those same dull embers burning with this horrible, mindless want. The antler-like protrusions twisted up and out, mismatched. Some were broken off, jagged edges like snapped bone. Others had strips of something dark hanging from them. Old cloth, hair, meat. I didn't look too close. I raised the rifle, every muscle trembling. The thing took another step forward, long toes curling into the snow, claws, black and thick, dug in like crampons. It made a sound, not a roar, not an animal cry, It was a breath, dragged slowly in and out, like a body with lungs full of ice, layers of crackling, frozen cartilage grinding on each other. Beneath it, something that might have been words in a language I didn't recognize, just at the edge of hearing. The tent flap behind me rustled. "Henry?" Mark whispered. "You okay out there?" "Stay inside," I rasped. "We've got company." It moved faster than anything that size should be able to. One heartbeat, it was 50 yards away. The next, it had lunged half the distance, body unfolding in this horrible, spider-like motion, arms reaching, claws gouging eyes as it skidded closer. I fired. The recoil slammed into my shoulder. The muzzle flashed a brief sun in the dark. The shot had to center mass somewhere in that too thin chest. The thing jerked, staggered, and then kept coming. The bullet had gone through something because black, thick fluid splattered the ice behind it, steaming in the cold. It screamed. I'll never forget that sound. It was like metal being torn, like a human scream dragged out and layered with animal howls, echoing off the trees, bouncing back at us from every direction. The tent exploded open behind me. Mark barreled out with the shotgun, half-zipped jacket flapping. Louis and Jake stumbled after him, eyes wide. "What the?" Mark started, then saw it. Even he didn't have a joke for that. The Wendigo, or whatever you want to call it, lowered its head and sprinted. We fired. Rifle, shotgun, the stuttering cracks of Jake's revolver. The air filled with muzzle flashes and the sharp tang of cordite. Some of the rounds hit. I saw chunks fly off, saw black ichor spray the snow. One of its antler bones shattered under a blast from the shotgun. It didn't stop. It hit us like a truck. One long arm swung, claws catching Mark in the chest and throwing him sideways, like he weighed nothing. He hit the ice hard, slid, came to a stop near the sleds, groaning. Louis tried to backpedal and slipped. The thing stepped over him, one foot pinning his leg to the ice with a sickening crack. Jake screamed something wordless and rushed forward, like an idiot, cracking off the last two shots in his revolver at nearly point blank. One hit its jaw, splintering bone. The other went God knows where. It grabbed him. Its hand closed around his upper arm and shoulder, like it was grabbing a doll. The claws sank in. I saw red blossom across his jacket. Jake screamed high, animal, nothing like his usual nervous laugh. The Wendigo lifted him partly off the ground, bending his body in a way humans aren't meant to bend. I don't love admitting this part. I froze. For a moment, maybe two, long enough to watch something I care about get torn apart. Then Louis shouted, "Henry, fire!" It snapped me back. He was right. Bullets weren't doing enough. It felt pain, sure, but not like a living thing. Not enough to make it stop. Fire. I dropped the rifle and lunged for the sled, fingers clumsy with adrenaline. We always carry a can of fuel for the stove. Liquid, high-proof, temperamental. I grabbed it, spun and ran straight at the thing. It had dropped Jake by then, or maybe Jake had gone limp enough that it let him go. He lay on the ice, blood spreading under him in a dark halo. The Wendigo turned toward me. Up close, the cold coming off it was unreal. My breath crystallized between us. The skin felt like it was freezing solid. Its eyes locked on mine. I didn't think. I just yanked the cap off the fuel and hurled the contents at its chest. The liquid splashed across gray skin, down its arms, over its sunken stomach, soaking into whatever passed for flesh. For half a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then it took a step toward me, slow, deliberate, like it was going to show me exactly how stupid I'd been. "Move!" I shouted at Louis, and dove sideways. He didn't move. He did one better. He lit a flare. The red light painted everything in hellish color. The monster, the snow, Jake's blood. Mark sprawled on the ice. Louis jammed the flare forward, using all his weight, and drove it into the Wendigo's soaked chest. For a fraction of a second the flare just hissed. Then the fuel caught. Flame roared up its torso, sliding along the soaked skin like it had been waiting for this. The smell hit us, burning hair, burning meat, something much worse underneath. The Wendigo screamed again. Louder, higher. The sound had words in it now, maybe, or almost words, like it was cursing us in some language too old for human throats. It stumbled back, clawing at its own chest, tearing strip of its own flesh off in burning chunks. Black fluid sprayed the ice, catching fire where it landed. The cold coming off it warped. It was like standing next to an open oven and an industrial freezer at the same time, heat and cold smashing together. I scrambled backward on hands and knees, grabbed my rifle with numb fingers, and fired again. I wasn't aiming for vital organs anymore, if it even had those in the usual places. I was aiming to drive it back. We emptied everything we had: shotgun shells, rifle rounds, the last flares. The monster staggered, turned, and bolted for the tree line in a burning, flailing rush. Its long legs tore gouges in the ice. Flames screamed behind it like a comet tail, spraying sparks. It hit the snow at the edge of the lake and vanished into the trees, leaving a trail of scorched trunks and smoking branches. The screams faded into the distance, echoing long after I knew it had to be too far for us to hear. Then there was silence again. Real silence. Just our breathing, ragged and desperate, and the crackle of small fires on the ice, where droplets of that thing had landed and were still burning. For a second, none of us moved. Then the reality of the situation slammed into me like a second impact. "Jake," I said, forcing my voice to cut through whatever shock I was in. "Louis, get pressure on his wounds. Mark, can you move?" Mark groaned and rolled on his back. "I've had worse," he lied, clutching his chest. He hadn't, but he could breathe, and nothing visibly moved wrong, so I left him be for the moment. I slid across the ice to Jake. He was pale, too pale. His eyes were open, staring at the sky, blinking slowly like he couldn't quite process what he was seeing. His jacket was shredded at the shoulder and upper arm, the fabric soaked through with blood. The skin underneath, I won't describe that in detail. Just know that the claws had gone deep. He had punctures where there shouldn't be holes, long tears, and a chunk of flesh missing, like something had taken a bite out of him. "Hey," I said, leaning over him. Stay with me, okay? Stay with me. You're not allowed to die on my watch. That's bad for business." He tried to laugh. It came out as a wet cough. "I know," I said. "That means you're still alive. Louis, get the trauma kit." We worked fast. Adrenaline helps. Training helps. Fear, it focuses you if you let it. We cut the rest of his jacket away, packed the worst wounds with hemostatic gauze, wrapped them tight, turned tourniquets where we had to. Louis's hands were shaking so badly I had to bark at him a few times to get him moving, but he kept it together. Mark dragged himself over eventually and helped stabilize Jake's head and neck. "We're going to die out here," Jake mumbled once, eyes glassy. "No," I said flatly, "we are not. Do you hear me? You don't get to make me give this talk to your parents. That's not happening. You hang on, and I'll cook you the best damn steak of your life when we get home. Deal?" He smiled weakly. "Medium rare," he whispered. "Whatever you want," I said. We got him bundled in every spare layer we had. Sleeping bag, tarp, anything to keep his body heat in. Then we rigged the sleds into a makeshift rescue litter, lashed him down and started moving. I wanted to believe we'd killed it. We'd set it on fire, lit it up like a torch, put more lead into it than most big game ever sees. But the stories don't say you can kill a Wendigo easy. They say it keeps going, that hunger doesn't just burn out. So I assumed it was still out there. We moved as fast as we could across the lakes, following a route I knew would eventually intersect with a snowmobile track. My world shrank to the line of our path, the weight of the sled harness digging into my hips, the sound of Jake's ragged breathing behind me. The sky stayed gray, the air stayed knife cold, but the smell didn't come back. Every time the wind shifted, I waited for that rot. It never hit. We made it to the battered signpost around dusk. Beyond it, a wide trail with hard-packed snow and the faint, blessed hum of distant engines. Snowmobiles. I've never been so happy to hear something in my life. We popped flares, waved, shouted. Eventually, two guys in helmets and heavy parkas came roaring down the trail, stopped and stared. I will say this. People up there see weird things. Maybe they didn't clock Wendigo attack, but they definitely clocked these guys are in trouble. They helped us get Jake on a sturdier sled, radioed ahead, got us out. At the clinic in the nearest town, they asked what had done it. I lied. "Big wolf," I said. "Maybe a pack. Came into camp, we scared it off, but it got him." The doctor nodded. "Bad winter for wolves," she said. "Not enough deer. They take risks when they're starving." I didn't look at Louis when she said that, or Mark. We all knew how far off that was. They saved Jake's life, though. Surgeries, skin grafts, antibiotics like candy. He kept his arm, mostly. Functions not great, but it's there. Physically, at least, he made it home. Mentally, you don't walk away from something like that entirely intact. The official story stayed what I said it was. Wolf attack in the Boundary Waters. Rare but not unheard of. They wrote it up in a local paper, a little cautionary tale about respecting wildlife. There was a grainy photo of me looking exhausted and hollow-eyed standing outside the clinic. My wife read the article and called me an idiot for not coming home sooner. Then she held on to me so tight I thought my ribs might crack. I couldn't tell her the full truth. How do you explain to someone, "Hey honey, there's something out there that wears the idea of hunger like a skin, and it knows my name now"? Over time, life slid back toward normal. I did smaller trips, summer stuff, fall weekends. I avoided deep winter. I told myself it was just trauma, that my brain had taken something awful and animal and wrapped it in the stories I'd read. That I'd seen a bear with mange or a deformed moose or some other freak. But sometimes, in the middle of the night, when the house is quiet and the wind hits the siding just right, I wake up with my heart pounding and my throat dry, and I can smell it again. Rotten ice. And I remember how it looked at me, not like a predator who'd gotten interrupted during a meal, like someone starving to death watching you eat, like it was memorizing me. Once, a few months after we got back, I got a message from Luis. He'd developed the film he shot out there. Most of it was normal stuff. Trees, snow, us laughing, Mark flipping off the camera. Then there was one photo. It was taken the morning after the first real encounter, when we found the tracks around camp. He'd pointed the camera at the tree line, trying to capture the scale of it. In the far left of the frame, between two trees, there was something. Not clear enough to be evidence, just clear enough to ruin your day. A tall, pale shape, long limbs, a hint of something bone-like curving above its head. It might have been a trick of the light. Pareidolia, our brains seeing patterns in chaos. Or it might have been standing there, watching, while we thought we were alone. We don't talk about it much. When we do, it's late. There's usually alcohol involved. None of us say the word Wendigo. You asked me earlier if I think those stories are real, or if they are just metaphors for starvation and madness. Here's what I'll say. Something out there walked like a man and moved like a nightmare. Something out there knew my name in a voice that wasn't its own. Something out there kept walking after bullets punched holes through it, and only screamed when fire touched it. Call it what you want. I've heard the lore. I've seen the tracks. I've smelled the rot. I've watched it burn and keep going. I don't care what label you put on it. I just know this. If you ever go north, deep into the winter woods, and you smell freezer burned meat on a night when nothing else is moving, and you hear someone you love calling your name from the dark, you keep walking. You keep walking and you don't look back, and you don't follow, because maybe it's just your mind playing tricks. Or maybe it's something with a stomach like a bottomless pit and bones wearing skin like a costume, trying to see what kind of meal you'd make. Either way, it's not worth finding out.